Frank Abagnale looks free before he ever feels free. That might be the strange trick of Catch Me If You Can. On the surface, the movie moves like a dream. Airports, hotels, checks, suits, uniforms, soft colors, quick escapes, and a young man who seems to understand how the world works before the adults around him do. He walks into rooms where he should not belong, and somehow the room accepts him. He puts on a pilot uniform, and suddenly people smile at him differently. He speaks with just enough confidence, and suddenly the lie becomes easier for everyone than the truth. And for an American audience, that idea has a very specific pull. Because America has always loved the story of becoming someone new. Leave the old town. Build a new name. Reinvent yourself. Fake it until you make it. Turn confidence into opportunity. Start over as many times as you need. In a warmer movie, that would be inspiring. In this movie, it is still exciting, but it is also quietly sad. Because Frank is not only chasing money. He is not only chasing women, cities, airplanes, or the thrill of getting away. If we watch closely, he is chasing a feeling that disappeared before the chase even began. He's trying to rebuild a version of his life where his parents are still together, his father still looks important, and the world still has a shape he can understand. The fraud is flashy, but the wound underneath it is ordinary. A kid watches his home fall apart, and instead of knowing how to grieve, he learns how to perform. That is why the movie can feel so light and so lonely at the same time. Spielberg gives the story the rhythm of a caper, but the emotional center is not victory. It is a teenager discovering that if he wears the right costume, adults stop asking the wrong questions. They see the role before they see the person. They trust the symbol before they verify the truth. And Frank learns very quickly that this is not just a weakness in banks or airlines. It is a weakness in people. The real Frank Abagnale story has been questioned many times, and that matters in its own way. But for the film, the uncertainty almost makes the movie more interesting. A story about a performer becomes surrounded by another performance. A movie about a beautiful lie lives under the shadow of a possibly exaggerated legend. So maybe the most useful question is not, how much of this happened exactly like this? Maybe the better question is, why does this kind of story feel so believable to us? Maybe because we recognize the bargain. We know how easily a confident voice can sound like authority. We know how a title can change the way a person is treated. Dr. Dutton. Lawyer. Pilot. Agent. Executive. We know how much American life can depend on the surface of success. The resume, the suit, the school name, the polished answer, the perfect little story about who you are and where you are going. Frank takes that logic and runs with it until it becomes almost absurd. But the movie never lets the absurdity become completely empty. Behind every escape, there is a boy who does not really have a place to land. He can enter almost any room, but he cannot go home. He can convince strangers he is grown, capable, impressive, untouchable. But he cannot convince himself that any of it is enough. So the film is not just asking whether Frank can be caught. It is asking what kind of world lets him disappear in plain sight. And maybe more quietly, it asks why a kid would rather become anyone else than stay alone with who he actually is.
Mom, home.
Before Frank learns how to fool an airline, he learns that adults can break the world without explaining it. That is easy to miss because the movie becomes so entertaining so quickly. We remember the chase. We remember the costumes. We remember the cleverness. But the first real collapse in Frank's life is not legal. It is domestic. His parents separate, and suddenly the world that gave him identity is no longer stable. He's asked to choose between them, as if a child can solve an adult failure by pointing to one parent and leaving the other behind. That moment matters because it gives the entire movie a different emotional shape. Frank does not begin as a criminal fantasy. He begins as a kid trapped in a family scene that is too painful and too confusing. And when he runs, it is not only because he wants adventure. It is because staying would mean accepting that home is no longer the place he thought it was. For many American viewers, this is where the movie becomes closer than its stylish surface suggests. Divorce is not unusual. Split homes are not unusual. Children moving between parents, trying to read adult moods, trying to protect one parent from the disappointment of the other, trying to act older than they are. None of that is rare. The film does not turn that into a speech. It just lets Frank react the way a lot of hurt teenagers react. He refuses the new reality and invents another one. That is why his first performances feel almost childish, even when they work. At school, he stands in front of a classroom and pretends to be a substitute teacher. It is funny, but it is also revealing. He has just lost control over his own life, so he creates a room where he can control the rules. He cannot make his parents stay together, but he can make a group of students believe he belongs at the front of the class. He cannot repair the family, but he can create a temporary world where people listen to him. The movie keeps returning to this pattern. Frank does not counterfeit only money. He counterfeits stability. A check is a promise. A uniform is a promise. A professional title is a promise. A fake name is a promise. Each one says, I am someone. I belong somewhere. You can trust me. But underneath each promise is the same absence. He is still a teenager whose family has come apart. His relationship with his father makes that absence even sharper. Frank Sr. is not simply a bad father, and the movie does not treat him that simply. He has charm. He has pride. He has the ability to make failure sound temporary. He tells stories that turn humiliation into resilience. He can lose status and still perform dignity. Frank watches that carefully. The son learns that when reality becomes unbearable, you do not have to say it directly. You can turn it into a performance. So when Frank succeeds, he keeps bringing the success back to his father emotionally. He wants the suit, the money, the glamour, the apparent upward movement, but not only for himself. He wants to restore the image of the family that broke. He wants to prove that the Abagnale name still means something. He wants his father to look at him and see rescue instead of loss. That is what makes the movie sadder than a simple con story. Frank can fool banks, hotels, hospitals, law firms, and almost everyone who stands in front of him. But he cannot fool the one thing that matters most, the fact that the home he wants to return to no longer exists in the form he remembers. And once that becomes clear, every escape starts to look less like freedom. It starts to look like a kid staying in motion because stopping would mean feeling everything he has been outrunning. One of the most unsettling things about Frank is how little he sometimes needs to do. He does not always build a perfect lie. He does not always have every detail ready. A lot of the time, he simply enters the room with the right shape, the right clothes, the right tone, the right amount of calm, and people begin filling in the gaps for him. They do part of the con themselves because the symbol arrives before the person does. The pilot uniform is the clearest example. Frank puts it on, and the world changes around him. People do not see a teenager pretending to understand aviation. They see panache. They see authority, glamour, safety, professionalism, and the mid-century American dream of movement. The uniform carries history before Frank says a word. It makes him believable because people already want to believe in what it represents. That is the sharp social observation inside the fun. Frank's fraud works because he understands that trust is often visual. A bank teller sees a clean-cut young man with the right confidence. A hotel clerk sees a professional traveler. A hospital sees someone who sounds like he belongs in a system full of hierarchy and specialized language. A school sees an adult posture and accepts it. Again and again, Frank discovers that institutions are not only built on rules, they are also built on shortcuts. For a US audience, that still feels familiar. Maybe the objects have changed. Checks and paper signatures feel old now. Airline glamour feels like another lifetime. But the deeper pattern is not old. American life still responds strongly to visible credentials. A job title can change a conversation. A school name can open a door. A LinkedIn profile can become a costume. A badge, a uniform, an email signature, a corporate logo, a polished resume, a confident answer. These things still shape who gets believed first. The film is set in a world where the lie travels through paper. Today, lies can travel through screens. But the emotional mechanism is similar. People trust a symbol because checking the person behind it takes time. And Frank is always faster than verification. But what makes him compelling is that his confidence is borrowed. It does not really come from a stable self. It comes from the costume. He is calm because the uniform is doing part of the work. He is charming because the room has already agreed to treat him as someone important. He is clever, yes, but he is also hiding inside other people's assumptions. That is why his most impressive roles often make him look less grown up, not more. A fake doctor, a fake lawyer, a fake pilot. These are adult identities with enormous social weight. But Frank wears them like a teenager trying on versions of adulthood in a mirror. He does not want the responsibility of the role as much as the emotional shelter it gives him. If he can be seen as impressive, maybe he does not have to feel abandoned. If he can be treated like an adult, maybe he does not have to admit how young he still is. The movie never says this in a heavy way. It lets the comedy carry the idea. The funniest scenes often work because everyone around Frank is too ready to trust the surface. But once the pattern becomes visible, the comedy starts to cut differently. We laugh because the lie is bold. Then we notice that the lie only works because the world is already trained to confuse confidence with competence. Frank is not inventing that world. He is exploiting it. And maybe that is why the movie still feels modern. It is not just about a boy who knew how to forge checks. It is about a culture where looking like the right person can be enough to become the right person for a little while.
You're a little late, but...
New Rochelle Rotary Club has a history that goes...
Frank does not invent performance by himself. He inherits it. His father is one of the most important figures in the film because he gives Frank a model for turning embarrassment into charm. Frank Sr. is not shown as a powerful man in the simple sense. He is a man losing ground. He has tax problems. He has status problems. His marriage is unstable. The life he wants to project and the life he is actually living are drifting apart. But when he speaks, he can still make failure sound like a story with a clean ending. That is why the famous mouse in the Cream story matters. On one level, it is a sweet survival lesson. Keep moving. Do not give up. Churn the cream into butter and climb out. It sounds like a piece of American optimism. Persistence saves you. Effort turns crisis into escape. But inside this movie, the story has a darker echo. It also teaches Frank that the answer to sinking is movement, not honesty. Keep performing. Keep charming. Keep refusing to admit that the situation is as bad as it looks. Frank Jr. absorbs that lesson completely. His father performs dignity at a smaller scale. The son performs entire identities at a national scale. The father tries to keep his pride intact while losing his old life. The son tries to turn that pride into proof that the family name still matters. In that sense, Frank's crimes are not only rebellion. They are a strange form of loyalty. This is why Frank keeps returning emotionally to his father, even after he appears to have everything young Frank might want. Money. Attention. Women. Travel. New. Status. None of it settles him, because none of it completes the old wish. He does not just want to be admired by strangers. He wants his father to be restored. He wants his father to look powerful again. He wants the world to reverse itself. For American viewers, that father-son dynamic can hit quietly. There is a familiar pressure in the idea of the father who must look successful, even while struggling. The small businessman who cannot admit decline. The man whose public charm hides private shame. The son who learns that love and pride are somehow tied to status. The family that smiles in public while falling apart behind closed doors. The movie places all of that under the shine of the 1960s, but the emotional pattern is not dated. Frank Sr. is charming enough that we understand why Frank loves him. But he is also trapped inside his own myth. He cannot quite give his son the truth, because he does not fully face it himself. He wants to be seen as respectable. He wants to keep the old performance alive. And Frank Jr., watching him, learns that appearance can be a way to survive humiliation. That makes the son's impersonations feel less random. Pilot, doctor, lawyer, these are not only jobs. They are symbols of the status Frank watched his father lose. Each one says, look, we are not small. We are not defeated. We are not the family that broke apart in that room. We are still important. But a borrowed identity cannot repair an inherited wound. And that is the tragedy of the father's shadow. Frank can go further than his father ever could. He can turn charm into access, access into money, money into movement, movement into legend. But he is still using the same emotional tool, making the world applaud so it does not notice what has been lost. The movie understands that children do not only inherit values. Sometimes they inherit coping mechanisms. Frank inherits his father's refusal to be ordinary, his fear of humiliation, his instinct to turn pain into a story. And once Frank takes that inheritance seriously, the whole country becomes his stage.
Running for the hills.
Carl Hanratty should be the simple obstacle. In a different version of the movie, he would be the serious man chasing the fun character. The badge, the rules, the paperwork, the pressure. Frank would be freedom, and Carl would be the system trying to close in. But catch me if you can slowly make that reading too small. Carl is not glamorous, but he is steady. He is not charming in the way Frank is charming, but he has something Frank does not: patience. He keeps looking. He keeps noticing. He stays with the pattern long after other people have been fooled by the surface. That is what makes their relationship feel stranger and more emotional than a normal chase. Carl wants to arrest Frank, but he also becomes the only adult who consistently sees him. Not the costume. Not the role. Not the pilot, the doctor, the lawyer, or the impressive young man at the counter. Carl sees the repeated behavior underneath. He sees the loneliness inside the pattern. The Christmas phone calls reveal this beautifully. Frank has built a life of movement, money, and performance. But when the holiday arrives, the person he calls is the man chasing him. That is not victory. That is emotional exposure. It tells us that Frank can enter glamorous spaces all year, but he still has no one to call when the fantasy goes quiet. And Carl, for all his seriousness, is lonely too. He understands work. He understands duty. He understands routine. But his personal life is not warm or full. So when Frank calls, the chase becomes something more complicated than law-catching crime. For our youth audience, this gives the movie a very recognizable, emotional contradiction. America loves individual escape stories, but real life often depends on the people who keep showing up. Teachers, agents, parents, caseworkers, supervisors, friends, quiet adults who notice when someone is slipping. Carl is not sentimental. He does not rescue Frank by hugging him or giving a speech. He rescues him, if we can use that word carefully, by refusing to let the disguise be the whole story. That does not erase the harm Frank causes. The movie is not saying fraud is cute because the criminal is sad. Carl's presence helps prevent that. He represents consequences, but he also represents recognition. He is the adult who says, "I know what you are doing. I know you are lying." And somehow, because he keeps returning, he also says, "I know there is a person behind it." This is why Tom Hanks plays Carl with such restraint. He is not a movie cop built from swagger. He is a man whose own loneliness has made him observant. He cannot charm a room like Frank, but he can sit with a case until the truth appears. Frank dazzles people into not looking closely. Carl's entire gift is that he looks closely. By the time the chase nears its end, Carl has become the opposite of Frank's fake identities. Frank's costumes are temporary. Carl is consistent. Frank keeps changing names. Carl keeps using the same one. Frank survives by making people believe quickly. Carl survives by not believing too quickly. Their connection works because each man exposes the other's emptiness. Frank has movement without stability. Carl has stability without warmth. And somewhere inside that contrast, the film becomes unexpectedly tender. The person chasing Frank is also the person most unwilling to let him vanish. Carl catches him because he's good at the job. But he matters because he pays attention when almost everyone else only sees the uniform.
A machine used to encode bank checks.
Fraud in Catch Me, if you can, looks almost innocent compared with the fraud people fear now. That does not mean Frank's actions are harmless. They are not. But the movie surrounds them with a soft, stylish, analog glow. Checks, signatures, hotel desks, bank counters, airline uniforms, polite conversations, paper trails. The world feels touchable. The lie has texture. Someone prints something, signs something, wears something, walks into a place, smiles, and the system bends. Today, the same kind of trust problem often feels colder. It arrives through an email, a profile, a phone call, a fake authority, a false job offer, a stolen identity, a message that looks official enough to make someone hesitate. Modern American fraud is not charming in the way the movie can make Frank appear charming. It is exhausting. It is everywhere. It makes people suspicious of links, phone numbers, bank alerts, text messages, romance, employment, and sometimes even the people who claim to be helping. That is why the movie can feel nostalgic and unsettling at the same time. It shows a more elegant version of the same weakness. We often trust the frame before we know the person. In Frank's world, the frame is a uniform. In ours, it may be a verified-looking account, a company logo, a professional website, an email signature, a school name, a corporate phrase, or a digital screen telling us something has been approved. America believes in costumes partly because America believes in becoming. That's the complicated part. The same culture that rewards reinvention also creates opportunities for imitation. If you can move to a new city and become someone else in a good way, maybe someone else can do it in a dangerous way. If confidence helps people rise, confidence can also help people deceive. If a resume is a story about the self, the line between presenting yourself and manufacturing yourself can become blurry. Frank lives inside that blur. He understands that people do not only respond to truth, they respond to signals. And the film keeps showing us how quickly signals become identity. A pilot does not have to explain himself the way an ordinary teenager does. A doctor is granted authority before he proves wisdom. A lawyer enters a room with assumed competence. A federal agent carries institutional weight simply by being attached to the institution. These roles are not meaningless. Real expertise matters. Real institutions matter. But the movie is interested in what happens when the shell arrives without the substance. This is where the American dream angle becomes less shiny. You can be anything is a beautiful promise when it means growth. It becomes haunted when it means you have to perform value before anyone will protect your real self. Frank takes the promise literally. He becomes anything. But each new identity moves him further away from being known. And maybe that is why the film has lasted. The details have aged, but the pressure has not. People still feel the need to look successful before they feel secure. They still polish the version of themselves that can survive a room. They still know that the right title can make strangers treat them differently. They still understand how much life can depend on being believed. Frank's world trusted paper. Our world trusts systems that are faster, more invisible, and sometimes more fragile. But the central question is the same. How do we know who someone is? And what happens when the answer is not based on the person, but on the costume they are wearing that day?
What was her name?
Grace.
The ending of Catch Me If You Can is quiet because Frank's real victory cannot look like the rest of the movie. It cannot be another escape. It cannot be another costume. It cannot be a bigger check, a better lie, a more impressive room, or a new name that makes people look at him differently. By the time Frank ends up working with the FBI, the movie has moved away from the fantasy of becoming anyone. It has arrived at the harder idea of becoming useful as yourself. That is a very different kind of American success. It is not the glossy version. It is not the myth of the unstoppable self-made man who outruns every limit. It is not the glamorous reinvention story where the past disappears and the future becomes pure freedom. Frank's ending is smaller, stranger, and more grounded. He sits in an office. He studies the same systems he once exploited. He uses the intelligence that helped him escape, but now he uses it in a place where he can be seen, corrected, trusted slowly, and held accountable. There is something moving about that, because the film does not pretend that becoming real is easy for him. Frank still wants to run. He still feels the pull of the airport, the uniform, the old rhythm of motion. Running has become his language. It is how he avoids pain, how he avoids shame, how he avoids the terrifying stillness of being himself without decoration. So when he stays, or returns, or learns to work within the life Carl has helped make possible, it does not feel like a simple moral lesson. It feels like the beginning of a person learning to exist without disappearing. Carl's role in that ending matters. He gives Frank a form of trust that is not based on being dazzled. He does not trust Frank because of a uniform. He does not trust him because of a title. He does not trust him because Frank has performed perfectly. He trusts him with caution, with memory, with consequences attached. In a way, that is the first honest trust Frank receives in the film. It is not blind. It is not easy. But it is real. And that may be why the movie's emotional aftertaste is so bittersweet. Frank spent so much of the story trying to be impressive, but what he needed was not admiration. He needed recognition. He needed someone to know what he was doing, why he was doing it, and still believe there might be a person worth saving underneath the damage. That does not excuse him, but it gives the story its human center. For a US audience, the ending gently pushes against the fantasy of endless reinvention. Reinvention can be powerful. It can be hopeful. It can let people survive. But if every new version of yourself is built to avoid one old wound, then movement starts to become another kind of trap. Frank looks free when he is running, but the freest moment may be the one where he no longer has to convince the room that he is somebody else. That is why the title, Catch Me If You Can, feels different by the end. At first it sounds like a dare, a stylish challenge from a young man who cannot be touched. But later, it almost sounds like a plea. Catch me because I do not know how to stop. Catch me because every costume works for a while and then leaves me alone again. Catch me because if nobody sees through the lie, maybe there will be nothing real left. Maybe Frank was not chasing freedom. Maybe he was chasing a place where he could finally stop performing. And maybe the most haunting thing about the movie is that the beautiful lie was never the pilot, the checks, or the fake names. The beautiful lie was the belief that becoming someone else would make him feel at home.